I walked through the front door after my shift at the electronics store and immediately knew something was wrong. My mother, my stepfather Dale, and my step-siblings Brandon and Amber were all sitting at the dining table with these serious, almost rehearsed expressions on their faces. My mom slid a handwritten document across the polished wood surface toward me. She told me I needed to split my deceased father's $75,000 college fund 3 ways with Brandon and Amber, or I had 7 days to move out. My father died 4 years ago in a car accident, and that fund was everything he left me for my education. My hands were shaking as I picked up the document. The words blurred together as I tried to process what was happening. This was the money my dad had carefully saved for years, working double shifts at the construction company so I could become a civil engineer like he always wanted to be, but never got the chance. I looked up at my mother. Her face was stone cold, completely unreadable. This was not the woman who used to make me chocolate chip pancakes on Saturday mornings, or who cried with me at my father's funeral. No, I told her. Absolutely not. This fund was set up specifically for me. My father made it a legal trust. It has my name on it, and mine alone. Dale leaned forward, his thick arms crossed over his chest. He had this smug expression that made my stomach turn. He said I was being selfish and entitled, that I needed to think about the family as a whole, not just myself. Brandon, who was 19 and had barely graduated high school, was smirking at me from across the table like this was all some kind of game he was winning. My mother cleared her throat and explained that she had been talking to a lawyer friend. According to this person, since she was the trustee of the fund until I turned 25, she had the legal authority to redistribute the money however she saw fit. I was only 22, 3 more years before I had full control. That cannot be right, I said. Dad would never have set it up that way. But my mother just shook her head. She told me that family meant sharing, that my father would want all his children taken care of, not just me. I wanted to scream that Brandon and Amber were not his children. They came into our lives 2 years after he died when Mom married Dale. My father never even met them. Amber, who was 17, sat quietly looking at these glossy brochures for expensive private colleges, schools that cost $60,000 a year. My state university engineering program cost less than half that, and I had been planning to work part-time to cover my living expenses so the fund would last all 4 years. Dale jumped back in his voice getting louder. He said his business hit hard times recently, and they could not afford to send Brandon and Amber to college without help. I had to understand their position. This was about fairness and doing what was right for everyone. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I told them I was going to contact Mr. Patterson, the trust administrator. He was my father's best friend from college, and the person Dad chose to oversee everything. He would explain the actual legal situation to them. My mother's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. She stood up too, her finger pointing at me. She said I had until Sunday to sign the redistribution agreement. That gave me 6 days. If I refused, I needed to be out of her house. She reminded me that I was an adult now and she had no legal obligation to let me live there. It was Monday evening. The deadline felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe Mr. Patterson could fix this. Maybe there was some legal protection my father had put in place that my mother did not know about. I kept my important documents in a small lockbox under my bed. The original trust paperwork was in there, along with my birth certificate and social security card. I pulled the box out and my heart stopped. The lock had been forced open. The metal was bent and scratched. Inside, my birth certificate and social security card were still there, but every single page of the trust documents was gone. Only my mother and Dale had spare keys to my room. Mom had insisted on having one for emergencies when I turned 18. I sat on my bed holding the empty lockbox, and the full weight of the situation hit me. This was not some spontaneous argument or misunderstanding. They had planned this. They had gone through my things, stolen the documents I would need to fight back, and already filed whatever paperwork they needed to make their case seem legitimate. I was not dealing with a family disagreement. I was dealing with people who had actively plotted against me. The bedroom that I had lived in since I was 7 years old suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every corner, every piece of furniture, held memories of a life that no longer existed. My father's old baseball glove sat on the shelf. He had given it to me the summer before he died, teaching me how to break it in properly. I wondered what he would think if he could see what was happening now. Would he be disappointed in me for not fighting harder? Or would he be heartbroken that the woman he loved was doing this to his son? I heard footsteps in the hallway. Brandon walked past my open door and laughed. He said I should start packing. His voice was full of this cruel satisfaction, like watching me suffer was entertainment for him. That night I barely slept. I kept going over every conversation, every detail, trying to find a way out of this trap. Tuesday morning came too fast. I called Mr. Patterson's office the moment they opened at 8 o'clock. My hands were sweating as I held my phone, rehearsing what I would say. But when the secretary answered, my carefully planned speech fell apart. Mr. Patterson was on a month-long cruise somewhere in Europe. He had left 3 weeks ago and would not be back for another week. The secretary was sympathetic when I explained it was an emergency about a trust fund, but she said she could not access any files or make any decisions without his direct authorization. She suggested I contact a lawyer. A lawyer costs money I did not have. My job at the electronics store paid $11 an hour. After my car payment, insurance, and phone bill, I had maybe $200 left each month. A single consultation with a lawyer would probably cost more than that. I sat in my car in the store parking lot before my shift started and searched online for information about trusts. Everything I read said that the original trust documents should be filed with the county probate office. If I could get copies from them, at least I would know exactly what my father had set up and whether my mother actually had the authority she claimed. I called my manager and asked for the day off. It was unpaid, which meant my next paycheck would be short, but I did not have a choice. I drove to the county records office, which was in the courthouse downtown. The building was this imposing gray stone structure with marble steps and columns that made me feel small and insignificant. Inside, I waited in line for 45 minutes before I got to speak with a clerk. I explained what I needed. She asked for my identification and my father's name and date of death. Then she went into the back room to search the records. When she came back, she had a thin folder in her hands. But something about her expression made my stomach drop, even before she said anything. The trust records had been recently updated, she told me, just 2 weeks ago. She showed me a document that listed my mother as having discretionary authority over distribution for family educational purposes. The language was completely different from what I remembered my father telling me about the trust. I told the clerk that was impossible. My father had been dead for 4 years. He could not have updated anything 2 weeks ago. She pointed to a signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like my father's handwriting, but it could not be his. I leaned closer, studying the swooping letters of his name. Something was off about it, but I could not pinpoint exactly what. The clerk explained that the document had been filed by a law office called Hendricks and Associates. She gave me the address. It was across town in one of those sleek modern buildings with tinted windows. I thanked her and left my mind spinning. Someone had forged my father's signature and filed fraudulent legal documents. This was not just a family fight anymore. This was actual crime. I drove straight to Hendricks and Associates. The office was on the 3rd floor, all polished wood and expensive artwork on the walls. The receptionist had perfect makeup and a smile that did not reach her eyes. I told her I needed to speak with someone immediately about a trust document they had filed. She asked if I had an appointment. When I said no, she told me that would not be possible. I could leave my contact information, and someone would call me back within 3 to 5 business days. I did not have 3 to 5 business days. I raised my voice, telling her this was about fraud and forged documents. A door opened down the hall, and a man in a dark suit came out. He was probably in his 50s with gray hair, and this look of practiced condescension. He introduced himself as Mr. Hendricks. He said he understood I was upset, but I needed to calm down. When I tried to explain about the forged signature, he cut me off. He said he represented the family's interests in updating the trust documentation. Everything had been done properly and legally. If I had concerns, I should retain my own counsel. Then he turned and walked back into his office, dismissing me like I was nothing. The receptionist was already picking up the phone, probably to call security. I left before things could get worse. Sitting in my car, I did an internet search for Hendricks and Associates. The website listed the partners and associates. At the bottom in small print there was a line that said the firm had been founded by Thomas Hendricks and was now run by his son Richard and his nephew Dale Hendricks. Dale Hendricks, my stepfather. This whole thing was a family operation. They had used Dale's cousin's law firm to file fake documents. The pieces were falling into place, and every single one made me feel more trapped. I drove home, but when I pulled up to the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. All my belongings were in cardboard boxes in the garage. The garage door was wide open like they wanted me to see. Boxes of my clothes, my books, my engineering textbooks that I had bought used from college students online. Everything I owned was being thrown out. I ran inside. My mother was in the kitchen calmly making dinner like this was a normal Tuesday evening. "What are you doing?" I asked her. "I still have 4 days." She said I was causing too much drama, making phone calls, going to lawyers, creating problems. She needed me to make a decision now so the family could move forward. She was calm, rational, like we were discussing what to have for dinner instead of her throwing me out. I went upstairs. Brandon had already moved into my room. His clothes were in my closet. His gaming setup was on my desk. The baseball glove my father gave me was gone. When I asked Brandon where it was, he shrugged and said he probably threw it in one of the boxes. My laptop was missing too. I had kept it on the desk with all my college application materials saved on it. Files about engineering programs, scholarship essays. I was working on research about different schools. Brandon said he had not seen it. My mother said the same thing, but I knew one of them had taken it. I spent that night sleeping in my car in a grocery store parking lot. The back seat was cramped and uncomfortable. Every time a car drove by, I woke up paranoid that security would tell me to leave. I kept thinking about how fast everything had collapsed. Less than 48 hours ago, I had a home and a future. Now I had nothing but the clothes in my backpack and a car that needed an oil change I could not afford. Wednesday morning, I woke up with my neck stiff and my back aching from sleeping curled up in the back seat. I used the bathroom at a gas station to wash my face and try to make myself look presentable. My reflection in the mirror showed dark circles under my eyes and the beginning of stubble on my jaw. I looked like exactly what I was, homeless. I spent the morning driving to every legal aid office I could find. The first one had a waiting list of 3 months. The second office said they only handled family law cases involving children or domestic violence. The third office was the most helpful. A paralegal named Sarah listened to my whole story. She looked genuinely concerned and took notes. But then she explained that their current caseload was completely full. The earliest they could take me on as a client was late October. It was currently early August. Sarah suggested I document everything carefully and consider filing a police report for the stolen documents and laptop. She said if I could prove theft, it might help my case later. I drove to the police station and waited another hour to speak with an officer. Officer Martinez was probably in his 40s with tired eyes that suggested he had heard every story imaginable. I explained about the missing trust documents and my laptop. I showed him photos of my room with Brandon's stuff in it and tried to explain about the forged county documents. He wrote everything down in his report, but when I asked what would happen next, he was honest with me in a way that made my hope crumble. He said this sounded like a civil family matter. The documents could be a misunderstanding or a legal issue that needed to be resolved through family court. The laptop could have been moved by accident. Unless I had clear proof of theft or fraud, there was not much the police could do. He gave me a copy of the report and told me to keep documenting everything. It was better than nothing, but not by much. Thursday afternoon, I went to work at the electronics store. I needed the money desperately now that I was buying fast food for every meal and putting gas in my car just to drive around instead of having anywhere to go. But when I arrived, my manager, Mrs. Garcia, called me into her office. Her face was serious in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. She asked me to sit down. Then she told me she had received a very disturbing phone call earlier that day. Someone claiming to be my concerned mother had called the store. The caller said I was struggling with substance abuse, that I had been stealing from family members to support a drug habit. The caller suggested Mrs. Garcia should watch me carefully around the register and inventory. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Mrs. Garcia knew me. I had worked there for 2 years. I had never been late, never had my drawer come up short, never given anyone a reason to doubt me. But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes now. That phone call had planted a seed of suspicion. Mrs. Garcia said she did not necessarily believe the allegations, but corporate policy required her to report the call. The company had decided to suspend me pending an investigation. It would take approximately 2 weeks. I would not be paid during the suspension. I tried to explain that my mother was lying, that this was part of a scheme to steal my inheritance. But even as the words came out of my mouth, I realized how crazy they sounded. A conspiracy involving my own mother, forged documents, and a lawyer. It sounded like something from a bad movie. Mrs. Garcia looked uncomfortable. She said she was sorry, but her hands were tied. I needed to leave the premises immediately and wait for a call from corporate. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time after that, just staring at nothing. No job meant no income. No income meant I could not even afford the cheap motel room I had been considering. I was completely and totally screwed. My best friend Marcus lived about 20 minutes away in an apartment complex near the community college. I called him and explained the situation. Marcus and I had been friends since middle school. He was one of the few people who really knew me and my dad. Marcus said I could crash at his place for the night, but his apartment was a studio and his lease had a strict policy about long-term guests. His landlord had already warned him once about having his girlfriend stay over too many times. He could let me stay 1 night, maybe 2 if we were careful, but not longer than that. I slept on Marcus's floor Thursday night. He ordered pizza and we played video games like old times, trying to pretend everything was normal. But it was not normal and we both knew it. Friday morning I remembered my father's brother, Uncle Tom. He lived about 2 hours north in a smaller town. We had not talked much since Dad's funeral, but he had always been kind to me. I called him and explained what was happening. Uncle Tom was furious when he heard what my mother was doing. He said I could absolutely come stay with him. His spare room was mine for as long as I needed it. But then he apologized. He was out of town on a work project until the following Wednesday. He was a contractor and had committed to finishing a job. He would be back in 5 days. 5 days. The deadline was Sunday. That was only 3 days away. I thanked Uncle Tom and told him I would figure something out until then. Friday afternoon, Marcus let me use his address to receive mail since I no longer had a permanent residence. A certified letter arrived. It was from Hendricks and Associates. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was a formal eviction notice. It claimed I was a legal adult tenant without a lease agreement. They were giving me until Sunday at noon to vacate the premises. If I did not leave voluntarily, they would pursue formal eviction proceedings through the courts. The letter explained that an eviction on my record would make it nearly impossible to rent an apartment anywhere in the future. Most landlords automatically rejected applicants with evictions. The letter went further. It stated that any attempt by me to access the trust funds before the family mediation process was complete would be considered acting in bad faith. They could pursue legal action against me for attempting to interfere with the proper administration of the trust. They had me boxed in from every angle. If I fought, they would evict me and destroy my ability to rent anywhere. If I tried to access my own money, they would sue me. If I did nothing, I would be homeless, and they would take everything my father left me. I thought about my father constantly during those hours. I tried to remember every conversation we had ever had about the future. He used to tell me that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you, that knowledge and skills were the real inheritance he wanted to give me. The money was just a tool to make that possible. But someone was taking it away. The very person who should have protected his wishes was destroying them. Friday evening I made a decision. I needed help from someone who actually knew the law and cared about what my father wanted. I remembered Frank Morrison. He had been my dad's roommate in college. They stayed friends for decades. Frank had moved to a neighboring state after he retired from practicing law, but we had exchanged Christmas cards every year. He had even spoken at my father's funeral about their friendship. I found Frank's number in my phone contacts and called. It rang 4 times before he answered. His voice was older than I remembered, but still warm and strong. I apologized for calling out of nowhere, and then explained everything. The ultimatum, the stolen documents, the forged county filings, Dale's cousin, the lawyer, the eviction. Notice all of it. I talked for probably 15 minutes straight. Frank listened, without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Frank spoke, and his voice was filled with anger. He told me that my father had talked to him about this exact scenario years ago. Dad had been worried about what would happen if Mom remarried. He specifically structured the trust to be irrevocable with me as the sole beneficiary. Frank said he still had email exchanges with my father discussing these concerns. Frank said he would help me, but he needed time to prepare a proper legal response. He would need to file motions, gather evidence, challenge the fraudulent documents. It would take at least 2 weeks to build a solid case. 2 weeks. I had 2 days. I told Frank about the Sunday deadline. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said I needed to play along temporarily, make them think I was surrendering while we built the real case behind the scenes. Once we had everything ready, we would strike back hard with evidence they could not refute. It felt wrong, like giving up, but I did not see another option. Friday night I slept in my car again, this time parked behind a 24-hour diner. I kept the doors locked and my phone charged in case of emergency. Every sound made me jump. At some point in the early morning hours, I realized I was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing you see in movies, just tears running down my face while I stared at the fabric ceiling of my car. Saturday morning, I called my mother. I told her I was willing to discuss a compromise. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears, but I forced the words out. She sounded pleased, almost cheerful. She invited me to a family meeting at 10 o'clock. She said we could work this out like adults. I arrived at the house at exactly 10. Dale opened the door with this smug smile that made me want to punch him, but I kept my face neutral and followed him to the dining room. Everyone was there. Mom, Dale, Brandon, Amber, and Mr. Hendricks, the lawyer. They had set up the meeting like a business negotiation. Mr. Hendricks had a leather briefcase and several documents spread across the table. He started by saying they appreciated my willingness to be reasonable. Then he presented their compromise offer. I would keep $30,000 of the trust fund. Brandon would receive $22,500. Amber would receive $22,500. Mr. Hendricks explained. This was more than fair since I was getting the largest share. The math made me sick. That was my money. All $75,000 of it. My father had saved every penny specifically for my education, but they were framing their theft as generosity because they were letting me keep less than half. I asked to see the original trust documents. I said I wanted to understand exactly what I was signing away. Mr. Hendricks produced a stack of papers, but I recognized them immediately as the fraudulent versions filed at the county office, the signature that was supposed to be my father's, but was not quite right, the language about discretionary authority that my father would never have agreed to. I pretended to read through them carefully. I asked questions that made me sound uncertain and overwhelmed. I played the part of a confused young man who was out of his depth. Inside, I was memorizing every detail to report back to Frank. Finally, I told them I needed 24 hours to come to terms with this emotionally. I said I would come back Sunday morning and sign the paperwork. I just needed one more night to accept how my life was changing. My mother looked at me with what might have been sympathy, or might have been satisfaction that she had won. She said that was fine. Tomorrow morning at 10, we would finalize everything. Dale was less patient. He told me not to try anything stupid. The deal was on the table now. If I disappeared or caused problems, it would be withdrawn and they would take legal action. I nodded and left. As I walked to my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Amber. She was looking around nervously like she was afraid someone would see her talking to me. She grabbed my arm and pulled me further from the house behind the detached garage. Her eyes were red like she had been crying. She told me she was sorry, that she never wanted any of this. She had overheard Dale and my mother planning everything for months. The whole story about Dale's business hitting hard times was not exactly true. Dale had lost everything gambling. He owed over $200,000 to some very dangerous people. Creditors had been calling the house constantly. A man had even shown up at the door once making threats. Dale had convinced my mother that taking the trust fund was the only way to save the family from financial ruin. He had spent months researching legal loopholes and working with his cousin to figure out how to make it look legitimate. Amber said she felt horrible. She did not want to go to an expensive private school funded by stolen money, but her mother would not listen to her. Brandon did not care at all. He thought the whole thing was funny. Then Amber told me something that changed everything. The original trust documents were hidden in Dale's home office safe. She knew this because she had seen Dale putting papers in there late one night, when he thought everyone was asleep. The combination was her birthday, 0817, August 17th. She begged me not to tell anyone she had helped me. If Dale found out, she did not know what he would do. He had a temper that scared her sometimes. I promised her I would not say anything. She hugged me quickly and then ran back into the house. I sat in my car thinking about what she had told me. The original documents were right there in the house. If I could get them, I would have proof of the fraud. But breaking into Dale's safe would be illegal. If I got caught, I could be arrested for burglary. That would destroy any credibility I had and make it impossible to fight the case in court. Saturday evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was 3 photos. All of them showed me sleeping in my car, taken from different angles and different nights. The message with the photos said, "Looks like you are really struggling. Sign tomorrow, and this will not get worse." Someone had been following me, taking pictures while I was at my most vulnerable. I thought about Brandon and his constant smirking. This had his signature all over it. I called Frank and told him everything Amber had shared. About the safe, the gambling debts, the dangerous creditors, everything. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he said if I could legally obtain those original documents, it would blow the whole case wide open. We would have definitive proof of fraud. But how could I legally get documents from Dale's safe? Frank suggested I could request a police escort to retrieve my property from the house. I already had a police report on file for the stolen documents. But the police would not help me break into someone's safe without a warrant, and getting a warrant required evidence I did not have yet. We were stuck in a circular problem. I needed the documents to prove fraud, but I needed proof of fraud to get access to the documents. Frank said the decision was mine. He could not advise me to do anything illegal, but he understood if I felt I had no other choice. Saturday night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my father, about how hard he worked to build that fund for me, about the conversations we had about college and engineering and building things that mattered, about the look on his face when I got accepted to the State University's engineering program just a month before he died. He had been so proud. I thought about what would happen if I did nothing. They would take the money. Brandon would probably waste his share on a truck or video games. Dale would use it to pay off loan sharks. My mother would tell herself she had done the right thing for her new family, and I would spend the rest of my life knowing I let them steal my father's legacy without a real fight. Sunday morning I made my decision. I knew my mother and Dale went to church every Sunday at 9 o'clock sharp. They always took Brandon and Amber with them. Church lasted exactly 1 hour, and they usually stayed for coffee in the fellowship hall afterward, which meant they would not be home until at least 11. I would have a small window of time. I technically still had a key to the house. I had not given it back when they started packing my things. Using it might be legally questionable, but everything they had done was far worse than questionable. At 9:15 Sunday morning, I parked down the street from the house and watched. My mother's car pulled out of the driveway with everyone inside. I waited 5 extra minutes to be absolutely certain they were gone. Then I drove up and parked in front. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was completely silent. I went straight to Dale's home office, which was a converted spare bedroom off the living room. The office smelled like Dale's cologne and cigar smoke. His desk was covered with papers and file folders. Behind the desk, there was a painting of a lighthouse on the ocean. I lifted it off the wall, and there was the safe exactly where Amber said it would be. I entered the combination 0817. The safe clicked, and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents. I started pulling them out, my hands shaking. The original trust paperwork was right on top, like Dale had been reviewing it recently. I spread it across the desk and started taking photos with my phone. The documents were exactly what Frank had described. The trust was irrevocable. I was named as sole beneficiary. My mother was listed as trustee, but only with the duty to protect and maintain the fund, not redistribute it. There was no discretionary authority whatsoever. I photographed every page, making sure the images were clear and readable. Then I kept digging through the safe. I found bank statements showing Dale's accounts were overdrawn, credit card statements with balances in the thousands. But the worst things were the letters. Handwritten notes with threatening language about payment deadlines. One letter explicitly mentioned breaking bones. Another described what happens to people who do not pay their debts. I found a promissory note in Dale's handwriting. It outlined his plan to access the trust fund and use it to clear his gambling debts. The note was dated 6 months ago, long before they had approached me with any of this. I was photographing the promissory note when I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. The front door was opening. I shoved the documents back into the safe as quickly and quietly as I could, but my hands were shaking so badly that papers fell on the floor. I heard Dale's voice in the living room. He was saying something about knowing I would try something, that Brandon had been watching the house. Brandon had not gone to church. He had been hiding somewhere, probably the garage, waiting for me to show up. I managed to close the safe and hang the painting back up, but there was no time to get out of the office. The door burst open. Dale, Brandon, and my mother were standing there. Dale's face was red with anger. He started yelling, calling me names, saying I was a thief and a criminal. My mother looked genuinely shocked, like she had not expected me to actually do something like this. Brandon just smiled, his phone out and recording. Dale pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. He reported a burglary in progress, his own stepson breaking into his home office and trying to steal valuables. His voice was calm and measured as he spoke to the dispatcher, playing the role of frightened homeowner perfectly. I tried to explain that I was only taking back what belonged to me, that those documents proved they were committing fraud. But my mother told me to be quiet. She said I was making everything worse. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. 2 officers came into the office. Dale had already put all the documents back in the safe and closed it. He explained that he had come home early from church to find me breaking into his personal safe. He showed them how the painting had been moved and claimed I was trying to steal cash he kept in there. I tried to explain the truth, that those documents were proof of fraud against me, that I was the victim here, not Dale. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I had taken of the trust paperwork. But one of the officers, a younger guy with a crew cut, shook his head. He said this was clearly a civil family matter. The fact that I had documents on my phone did not give me the right to break into someone's safe without permission, especially since I had already been served with an eviction notice. Dale said he did not want to press criminal charges because I was family, but he wanted an emergency protective order. He claimed he was afraid I might become violent. My mother did not defend me. She just stood there silently, and her silence said everything. The officers told me I needed to leave immediately. One of them escorted me out to my car, while the other took statements from Dale and my mother. As I was getting into my car, the officer handed me paperwork. It was an emergency restraining order. I was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of the house or any family members. If I violated it, I would be arrested. I drove to a park a few miles away and just sat there trying to process what had happened. I had the photos on my phone. That was something. But I had also just been caught breaking into someone's home, and now there was a restraining order against me. Frank had warned me about the risks, and I had taken them anyway, and now everything was worse. I called Frank and told him what happened. He listened without judgment. Then he asked me to send him all the photos immediately. He spent an hour reviewing them, while I waited in my car parked under a tree in the empty park. When Frank called me back, his voice had changed. He was energized, almost excited. The photos were exactly what we needed. The original trust documents proved Dale and his cousin had filed fraudulent paperwork. The threatening letters proved motive. The promissory note showed premeditation. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was criminal conspiracy. But Frank also delivered bad news. He had been checking the court system online. Mr. Hendricks had filed a motion in probate court that morning. They were claiming I was attempting to unlawfully interfere with the proper administration of the trust. They were using the breaking and entering incident as evidence that I was unstable and acting irrationally. They wanted an emergency hearing to freeze the entire trust pending a psychological evaluation of me. If they succeeded, the trust could be tied up in court for years. I would not be able to access a single penny for college or anything else while lawyers fought over it. Frank said he would file counter motions immediately, but the emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday. We had 4 days to prepare. Monday morning, I checked my email and found a message from my university. My stomach dropped as I read it. My acceptance to the engineering program had been rescinded. The email was formal and cold. It stated that the admissions office had received information about concerns regarding my financial aid application. A family member had contacted them to report that I had misrepresented my family financial situation and available assets. The university took fraud very seriously. They were revoking my admission effective immediately. I read the email 3 times trying to comprehend it. Someone had called my university and sabotaged my admission. Everything I had been working toward for 4 years was gone. The fall semester started in 3 months. Even if I somehow got the trust fund back, I had no school to attend. I sat in my car in that same park and completely broke down. Not quiet tears this time, but actual sobbing. The kind where you cannot breathe right and your chest hurts. I had lost my home, my job, my money, and now my future. Every single thing that mattered was gone. I had fought back, and I had lost worse than if I had never fought at all. The restraining order meant I could not even confront my mother about what she had done. The court case meant the money was frozen regardless of who won. The rescinded admission meant even if I got the funds back someday, my education was already derailed. Marcus called me that afternoon to check in. He had heard through mutual friends about what happened. He said I could come back and stay with him for a few more days, restraining order, be damned if nobody knew where I was, but I could hear the worry in his voice. He had his own life to protect, his own apartment and lease to think about. I thanked him, but said I would figure something out. I did not want to drag him into my disaster. That night I slept in my car in a different parking lot, this one behind a 24-hour fitness center. I kept thinking about my father's funeral. The minister had said something about how the people we love never truly leave us, that they live on through the impact they had on our lives and the legacy they left behind. But what legacy? The money my father saved was being stolen. The education he dreamed of for me was destroyed. The trust he placed in my mother to protect me after he was gone had been completely betrayed. I fell asleep wondering if he would be ashamed of me for failing to protect what he had built, or if he would understand that I had tried my best against impossible odds. Tuesday morning, my phone rang at 7:30. It was Frank. He told me he had been up most of the night working on the case. He had contacted Mr. Patterson's office in Europe and explained the emergency situation. They had given him authorization to access the original trust filing documents from when my father first created the trust 12 years ago. Frank drove 2 hours to meet me in person. We sat in a coffee shop while he showed me what he had found. The original documents filed when I was 10 years old had my father's real signature. It was notarized, witnessed by 2 people, and verified by the bank. The language was crystal clear. The trust was irrevocable with me, as sole beneficiary. My mother's role as trustee was specifically limited to preservation and maintenance of funds with absolutely no authority to redistribute or modify the terms. More importantly, Frank had found email exchanges between himself and my father from 8 years ago. My father had explicitly written about his concerns. He worried that if something happened to him, my mother might remarry, and her new family might try to access the trust. That was why he made it irrevocable. That was why he chose Mr. Patterson as administrator. He had been protecting me from exactly what was happening now. Frank had spent Monday filing emergency motions with the probate court. He requested an immediate investigation into the fraudulent documents. He was also filing a motion to remove my mother as trustee due to breach of fiduciary duty. He wanted the bank to become temporary trustee until I turned 25. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Frank said I needed to make a formal statement to the district attorney's office about the fraud. This was not just civil court anymore. If the DA decided to pursue it, Dale and his cousin Mr. Hendricks could face criminal charges for filing false documents and conspiracy to commit fraud. Tuesday afternoon, I went to the district attorney's office and met with an assistant prosecutor named Miss Chen. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate every word I said. I told her everything, the whole story from the beginning. She took notes and asked specific questions about dates and who said what. When I showed her the photos from Dale's safe, her expression changed. She made copies of everything and said she would discuss it with her supervisor. Financial fraud cases were serious, especially when they involved forged legal documents. Wednesday afternoon, I got a phone call from my mother. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it. She was crying. Really crying, not the manipulative tears she had used before. She begged me to drop the legal case. She said Dale had lied to her about how bad the gambling debts were. She claimed she did not know about the forged documents until after everything was filed. She said, if I pursued criminal charges, Dale would leave her, and she would lose everything. I asked her why she thought that was my problem. She had chosen Dale over me at every single step. She had thrown me out of my own home. She had stolen my father's legacy. She had ruined my college admission. And now she wanted me to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. She started getting angry then, her voice rising. She said I was being selfish and vindictive, that I was tearing the family apart over money, that my father would be ashamed of how I was acting. That was when something snapped inside me. I told her my father would be ashamed of her, that he had trusted her to protect me, and she had betrayed that trust completely, that she had chosen her new husband's comfort over her own son's future. I told her I was going forward with the case and hung up. My hands were shaking after that call. Part of me felt guilty for being so harsh with my mother. But another part of me, a stronger part, knew I had finally said what needed to be said. Thursday morning came too quickly. Frank picked me up at 9, so we could prepare before the 2 o'clock hearing. We went over my testimony, what questions the judge might ask, how to stay calm under pressure. The courthouse was busy when we arrived. People in suits rushing between courtrooms, families waiting on benches outside, lawyers conferring in hushed tones. Frank led me to probate courtroom C on the 3rd floor. Inside, Dale, my mother Brandon, and Mr. Hendricks were already seated at the defendant's table. My mother would not look at me. Dale stared straight ahead with his jaw clenched. Brandon was on his phone, apparently bored. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Judge Martha Reynolds, according to the nameplate on her bench. She had a reputation, Frank had told me, for being fair but absolutely intolerant of anyone wasting her time. The hearing began with Mr. Hendricks presenting their side. He argued that I was a troubled young man who had become fixated on the trust fund to the point of criminal behavior. He referenced the breaking and entering incident, the restraining order, and my alleged instability. He requested that the trust remain frozen, and that I undergo psychological evaluation before being allowed any access to the funds. Then it was Frank's turn. He methodically presented the original trust documents from 12 years ago. He showed how the signatures did not match. He presented my father's emails establishing intent. He walked through the timeline of how Dale's gambling debts coincided with the sudden interest in redistributing the trust. Judge Reynolds asked to see the documents herself. She spent several minutes comparing the original signatures to the fraudulent county filings. Her expression grew more severe with each page she reviewed. Then Frank dropped his biggest piece of evidence. He had subpoenaed Dale's financial records as part of the discovery process. He projected them onto a screen in the courtroom. Gambling losses totaling over $200,000, multiple accounts with collection agencies, and text messages between Dale and his cousin Mr. Hendricks discussing the trust fund months before they ever approached me. One text message read, "The kid won't know what hit him. By the time he figures it out, the money will be gone. Another message from Dale to Mr. Hendricks. Just make the paperwork look legal. The mom is on board. She'll do whatever I say. The courtroom was silent as those messages appeared on screen. My mother's face had gone completely white. Mr. Hendricks was frantically whispering to Dale. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses and looked directly at Dale and Mr. Hendricks. She asked if they had anything to say about these messages. Mr. Hendricks tried to argue that the messages were taken out of context, that they were discussing legitimate legal options for restructuring family finances. Judge Reynolds cut him off. She said she had been a probate judge for 23 years and she knew fraud when she saw it. She asked if there was any legitimate reason why Dale's cousin should have filed documents with a signature from a man who had been dead for 4 years. Mr. Hendricks had no answer. Judge Reynolds announced her ruling. She was immediately removing my mother as trustee of the fund. The bank would assume control. She was ordering a criminal investigation into the fraudulent documents. She was referring both Dale and Mr. Hendricks to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution. Then she looked at me, and her expression softened slightly. She said she was sorry for what I had been put through. She was granting me immediate access to the trust fund since I was over 21 and enrolled in college. The only condition was that I use the funds for educational purposes as originally intended. The restraining order was vacated immediately. I was free to return to the house to collect any remaining belongings with a police escort if I wanted one. Outside the courtroom, 2 detectives were waiting. They asked Dale and Mr. Hendricks to come with them to the station to answer some questions. It was not an arrest, they said, but it was not optional either. My mother tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway. She was crying again, reaching for me. She said she was sorry that she had made terrible mistakes, that she hoped I could forgive her someday. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about all the times she had chosen Dale over me. All the times she stood silently while they attacked me. All the ways she had betrayed my father's memory. I told her I needed her to choose me just once, but she never did. Every single time she chose Dale. And now she wanted forgiveness because she was facing consequences. I walked away. Frank walked beside me, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in support. That evening, Frank helped me draft a letter to the university. We explained the entire situation. We included the court documents proving fraud and showing that I had been the victim, not the perpetrator. We provided Judge Reynolds' ruling and her explicit statement that I had done nothing wrong. The university agreed to review my case. A week later, I got an email. My admission was restored. They apologized for the confusion and the distress their decision had caused. I would be welcome in the fall semester as originally planned. 6 weeks passed before everything was fully resolved. The criminal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Dale pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges. His lawyer managed to negotiate a plea deal. He received 2 years in prison and 5 years of probation afterward. The DA said it was a lighter sentence than they wanted, but Dale had cooperated in testifying against his cousin. Mr. Hendricks fought the charges at first. He claimed he had simply made an error in filing documents. But the text messages made that defense impossible. He eventually pleaded no contest to avoid trial. He lost his law license permanently and received 18 months in prison plus fines and restitution. The probate court issued a final ruling on the trust. It was restored to exactly what my father had established 12 years ago. I was named as sole beneficiary, with immediate access to all $75,000. The fraudulent county documents were expunged from the record, like they had never existed. The judge also ruled that my mother had to pay $15,000 in restitution to cover the legal fees Frank had incurred on my behalf. If she could not pay it directly, it would be deducted from any future inheritance or marital property she received. My mother filed for divorce from Dale 3 days after his guilty plea. The divorce was messy. She lost the house because it had been in Dale's name. His creditors seized it to pay off some of his gambling debts. She ended up moving to a different state to live with her sister. Brandon went with her. I never heard from him again. I hoped he learned something from watching his father go to prison, but I doubted it. Amber was different. She sent me a letter about a month after the court case ended. She apologized for not speaking up sooner. She said she was proud of me for fighting back even when it seemed impossible. She was living with her grandmother now and planning to attend community college. She wanted to become a teacher. She was paying her own way with student loans and a part-time job. She said it felt good to earn something honestly. I wrote her back. I told her I understood why she stayed quiet, that I did not blame her for anything. I wished her luck with school and meant it. My mother reached out one final time about 3 months after everything ended. She asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she wanted to apologize properly and try to rebuild our relationship. I agreed to meet her, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I needed to say things that I had never said before. We met at a small diner halfway between where she was living and where I was. She looked older than I remembered, tired. She started talking immediately, explaining how Dale had manipulated her, how she did not understand what she was doing, how sorry she was. But I stopped her. I told her she could not blame everything on Dale. She had made choices. She had stood silently while they attacked me. She had let them throw me out of my home. She had chosen Dale's comfort over my future at every opportunity. I said the worst part was not the money, or even the homelessness. The worst part was that she had shown me I could not trust her, that when I needed my mother most, she was not there. She started crying and making excuses. She said I did not understand how complicated adult relationships were, that Dale had been paying the bills and she was afraid of being alone. That was when I realized she still did not get it. She was still making excuses. She still could not simply say she was wrong without adding qualifications and explanations. I told her I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. She had broken something between us that could not be fixed with apologies. I paid for both our coffees and left. She called me a few times after that, but I did not answer. Eventually she stopped trying. I used the trust fund exactly as my father intended. I enrolled in the State University's civil engineering program for the fall semester. I found a small apartment near campus. It was not fancy, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom that had weird water pressure. But it was mine. Nobody could throw me out or threaten me, or use it as leverage against me. Uncle Tom helped me move in. He brought his truck full of used furniture he had collected from friends. A couch that sagged a little, a desk with a scratched surface, a lamp that flickered sometimes. But it felt like home in a way that my mother's house never had again after Dale moved in. The retail job offered to take me back. The corporate investigation had cleared me of any wrongdoing. Mrs. Garcia called personally to apologize. She felt terrible about suspending me based on a malicious phone call. She offered me a raise and a shift supervisor position. I thanked her for the offer but declined. I had found a part-time job in the university engineering lab instead. It paid a little less, but I would be working with professors and grad students on actual projects. I would learn more in that job than any retail position could teach me. On the first day of classes, I sat in engineering fundamentals with 60 other students. The professor, Dr. Williams, was probably in his 50s with gray temples and chalk dust on his blazer. He talked about what engineering meant, about solving problems and building things that improved people's lives, about the responsibility we would have as engineers to do good work and maintain integrity. I thought about my father during that lecture. He used to tell me that engineers were modern problem solvers, that the world needed people who could look at a challenge and figure out a solution. He never got to become an engineer himself. Life and bills and family responsibilities got in the way. But he wanted that for me. He worked himself to exhaustion to make it possible. And here I was in that classroom because he had the foresight to protect his dream for me even after he was gone. I carried a photo of my father in my wallet. It was from the year before he died at my high school graduation. He had his arm around my shoulders and this huge, proud smile on his face. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it, especially on hard days when I felt overwhelmed by coursework or money stress. I visited his grave a month into the semester. The cemetery was quiet, just birds and wind through the trees. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and talked to him like I used to when he was alive. I told him about my classes, about the trust fund situation and how it had all worked out. I thanked him for protecting me, even though he could not have known exactly what would happen. I told him I understood now why he structured the trust the way he did. He knew my mother's weaknesses. He knew she might remarry and that a new husband might cause problems. He protected me from that future because he loved me enough to plan for scenarios he hoped would never happen. I promised him I would not waste this opportunity, that I would become the engineer he always knew I could be. The leaves were starting to turn colors early, fall in full effect. The air smelled like grass and distant wood smoke. I sat there for a while longer, just being present with the memory of my father. Over the following months, I learned things about myself I had not known before. I learned I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive homelessness and betrayal and still get back up. I learned that family was not just about blood relations. Marcus, Frank, Uncle Tom, even Amber in her own way, had shown me more loyalty than the people who should have protected me. I learned that integrity matters more than peace, that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when the cost is high, that surrender to injustice is worse than any temporary hardship you might face in opposition. I learned that trust is fragile and precious. Once broken, it can rarely be fully repaired. My relationship with my mother would probably never be what it was before. That loss hurt, but I had to accept it and move forward anyway. Most importantly, I learned that real love is protective. My father loved me enough to plan for my future, even knowing he might not be there to see it. He put systems in place to guard my dreams. That kind of love was rare and valuable and worth honoring. Now, looking back on everything that happened, I can see it differently than I did in those desperate moments sleeping in my car. At the time, I felt like a failure, like I was losing everything and could not protect what my father had built for me. But I was actually learning to fight, to stand up for myself when everyone else had abandoned me, to find strength I did not know I had. The story of those few weeks became something I rarely talked about with new friends or classmates. It felt too personal, too raw, but it shaped who I was becoming. It taught me to recognize when people were manipulating me. It showed me who my real friends were. It gave me an appreciation for what I had that I never would have developed otherwise. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had just signed their agreement that first night. If I had accepted the $30,000 and walked away, I would have avoided the homelessness and the fear and the legal battles. But I also would have lost something more important than comfort. I would have lost my self-respect. I would have betrayed my father's trust and his sacrifice. Fighting back was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the thing I was most proud of. If you have ever faced betrayal from the people who should protect you, I want you to know something. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Your future is not destroyed by their choices. You have more strength inside you than you realize, and sometimes the hardest path is the only one worth walking. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who betrayed your trust? How did you find the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who is going through something similar right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and know they are not alone in their struggles. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future stories about overcoming injustice and finding strength in impossible situations. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing someone else survived a similar situation is exactly what gives us the courage to keep going. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some comfort or inspiration, or just reminded you that justice is possible even when everything feels lost. Take care of yourselves. Protect the people who deserve your protection, and never stop fighting for what is right. Your future self will thank you for the courage you show today.